Hello, and welcome to Community Voices, where we talk to Humboldt County's movers and shakers. Today's guest, Natalynne DeLapp, Executive Director, Humboldt County Growers Alliance. And now here's your host, Paul Bressoud.
Hello and welcome to Access Humboldt's Community Voices. I'm Paul Bressoud, I'll be your host, and today our guest is Natalynne DeLapp, the Executive Director of the Humboldt Growers Alliance. Welcome.
Thank you so much.
You know, the first thing I always ask people is what their job is about. What is their job? Tell us a little bit about what you do for the Humboldt Growers Alliance, and we can go from there.
Awesome. So Humboldt County Growers Alliance, HCGA, was formed 5 years ago. We just had our anniversary last week. And HCGA is a trade association that represents licensed cannabis operators in Humboldt County. We work with all license types, but primarily cultivators, followed by manufacturers, distributors, and a few retailers. And our job is to advocate and represent their interest in local, state, and federal policy arenas. We also work on market development so that many people don't really understand how cannabis has to move through the licensed supply chain. So we work through the supply chain, primarily with manufacturers or distributors or retailers, to talk to them about the importance of Humboldt cannabis. We do a lot of educational events with our members. We're constantly educating ourselves. Our members educate us. We in turn educate policymakers, and we work through a lot of democratic process with our members to ensure that their voices are accurately being conveyed in the way that they want us to.
Sounds like you have a full-time job.
Yeah, I'm 2 phones and 2 laptops constantly.
Let me do the first question. I did a little math as you started out. 2022 minus 5, let's say, 2016 or 17, you're getting this organization together, right?
Yes.
Okay. Now, 2018 was the legalization of marijuana, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Was it hard to organize an alliance before there was the actual, the law passed, the passage of the law to make cannabis legal?
No, actually it wasn't. And that's a misnomer, because in 2018 is when Prop 64 took effect. But Governor Jerry Brown signed into law the Medical Marijuana Regulation Safety Act in October of 2015. Prior to that, there has been a significant amount of community organizing in Humboldt, both as environmental, as people that were medical marijuana cultivators. And so there's a long history of community organizing in this county. And so going back, it's early from my perspective, 2010 was the original Prop 19 legalization effort. And so people have been talking about how to organize, how to protect Humboldt, how to protect the name and the reputation of Humboldt for at least a dozen years now. And coming through 2014 and 15, there was organizing efforts in Humboldt County that were tracking simultaneous with our brand new freshman legislators, Assemblymember Wood and Senator McGuire. There were people from Humboldt working directly with those 2 freshman legislators on what became the Medical Marijuana Regulation Safety Act. And so many of us were working during that same time. And so, what is community organizing? You need to know how to get a hold of people, which is emails and phone numbers. And, we were well connected and able to help pull people together. And, we worked directly with the county. And so right after Governor Brown signed MMRSA into law, we were already working with the county to develop the first cannabis land use law, and which was signed into effect in February of 2016. And so I work with primarily folks that started the process of coming into compliance in the beginning of 2016. And
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
First issue, the protecting of the name, or going ahead and working with the issues regarding the legalization of medicinal marijuana?
What was incorporated into that law, Medical Marijuana Regulation Safety Act, were protections for the environment to ensure that, surface waters were protected. So there were a lot of environmental protections included. There were also initial provisions to develop, actually it was in the second iteration, but county of origin protections. And that was Senator McGuire that really went to bat to help protect places like Humboldt. So if a business is not completely sole sourcing product from Humboldt County, you can't say that the product is Humboldt. And so we already have laws in place and have had those laws in place. They also went a few steps further over the years to develop what are called appellation of origin protections. And so that way, when we think of places like Napa is the county of origin. And then within Napa, there's 24 sub-appellations that each have unique geographic characteristics and cultural characteristics that relate to that wine. And so we have those laws in place in California, and some of the very first organizing efforts around what that could look like here in Humboldt are already underway.
Are they in place yet?
No, because the process to get legally recognized, those laws just came out a few weeks ago, for stuff that started several years ago. And so the initial organization is starting and underway, and it will probably take a few years before the first appellation of origin is recognized.
Well, that's interesting. Now, you've had that issue going on. Lately in the news, the issue, of course, was a fair and equitable tax that could be involved. And I'll have you explain that, but is it tough to have a lot of issues at once? I mean, maybe you should explain to us how many issues are out there right now that the Alliance is working on.
Cannabis is the most complicated and regulated industry that's ever been developed in the state of California, which is already a notoriously challenging state for business. And I say this as a person who's a longtime environmentalist. We have very complicated environmental laws. We have CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act, that requires that every project has to meet a certain standard. And so that means here in Humboldt County, our water, our wildlife, our cultural resources are being protected. And so for the last going on 5 years, the majority of the work that is going on in Humboldt has been the action of retroactively permitting almost 1,000 cannabis businesses. So the last 5 years, we've spent a lot of time on retroactive compliance. Meanwhile, we have a taxing system that no other industry
I raised
has.
my hand. Explain to us what retroactive permitting is. Why is that a great challenge?
That is a very large challenge, because typically what would happen if a person wants to build a new house or develop some piece of property, they go through the proper slow authorization, working with whatever, either the city or the county, to get permitted. And you don't start building until you're fully authorized. Because we had a group of cannabis farmers that were not regulated because there were simply no laws to regulate them, they could not go to the Department of Fish and Wildlife or go to the county and ask for proper authorization to do grading or tree clearing. So they did it. And so to come back with all of the state agencies involved now, which is Department of Fish and Wildlife, CAL FIRE, Army Corps of Engineers, the tribes, the county, and ... The list goes on and on, all the way down through all the state agencies, State Water Board, to retroactively ensure that the water resources are going to be protected, the biological resources are going to be protected, the cultural resources are going to be protected for pre-existing activities is challenging, which is why it's taken our county so long. And if anybody likes to watch the County Planning Commission every other Thursday night, you'll typically see about 8 to 10 to 15 or 20 cannabis projects, most of which are pre-existing, that are still marching through this process. So that's just, locally, but what are the other issues that we're facing? I mean, right now, we are asking, in fact, we're pleading with the state of California to allow cannabis cultivators in the state of California to allow us to not grow. That's crazy. In any other agricultural industry, there are protections in place so that if farmers are overproducing, there's mechanisms for fallowing. There's also price supports. There are low-cost loans. There are all of these tax credits and supports. Cannabis does not have a single one of those, and that is because it is still federally illegal, and most of those supports are federal programs. In the state of California, we are asking the Department of Cannabis Control for a mechanism to allow farmers to not cultivate. And that's going to be hard. I don't know if we're going to get it. Otherwise, if a farmer does not want to cultivate, but they do not want to lose their license, they have to pay between $5,000 and $30,000 annually just to renew that license.
So let me ask this question.
It's a lot of money, right?
It's a lot of money. Can the state go ahead and enact programs, a fallowing program at a state level?
Oh, 100%. So these are all state laws. So when the voters passed Proposition 64, it was known as the Adult Use Marijuana Act. Previously, we had the Medical Marijuana Regulation Safety Act, and those two state laws got together and they had a baby, and that's called the Medical and Adult Use Cannabis Regulation Safety Act. So that's the set of laws, and then there's thousands of pages of regulation that go along with those laws.
My question was,
yeah,
with those thousands of pages of regulation, and if anything becomes legalized, anything, then it's going to come with thousands of pages of regulation, because then it has to be regulated. I mean, that makes sense. But my question was, when you talked about the federal financial assistance that could go towards fallowing, I mean, that goes all the way back to the New Deal, if you talk about that, and because the federal government can't go ahead and extend that to marijuana growers, could the state go ahead and set up a program like that would go ahead and financially benefit growers to not grow?
Yes, they could. And we're asking for that, but they don't want to do it.
When you say you're asking for that, I saw on your website, you have lobbyists, correct, that go to Sacramento?
We do. So we're Humboldt County Growers Alliance. We're partnered in with Origins Council, which is an umbrella organization. And then we are working together with 6 legacy producing regions. So Humboldt, Mendocino, Trinity, Nevada County, Big Sur, and Sonoma. And so together we have 900 members strong. We're the largest trade association in the state. We do have a lobbyist. We do regularly talk with the Governor Newsom's administration. We regularly are talking with the Department of Cannabis Control. We are regularly in communication with our state assembly member and senator. So we're well connected. It's just that politics don't always want to move in certain directions, despite how squeaky the wheel is.
How about your members? Do they understand the process as far as, I mean, it's all new to them, the regulatory law? Is it something that becomes contentious?
I mean, I would say because we've been at this for 5 years, a lot of our operators who are still in, we all have like a master's degree in government relations now. The folks that are still in, there's not an option. Like we can't, farmers are not allowed to really be growers anymore. There are taxes, paperwork, OSHA, human resources, all of the typical regulations that go with other businesses on top of public policy and becoming informed community members, citizens, advocates. So they have really just stepped up in ways that are beyond incredible to me. These are farmers with green thumbs. A lot of them are parents still with young kids. So they're dealing with their day-to-day stuff with their relationships and their kiddos on top of volunteering and staying engaged and showing up in Sacramento when we need them to, running compliant businesses, trying to do their absolute best to fulfill the dream that they had to participate in this legal market over the last 6 years. But it's often that, I mean, unfortunately and frankly, what California has created is simply not working. And I mean, there's a long and very good article that was just published yesterday in the Rolling Stone, Cannabis in Crisis. It's a California issue. It's affecting all aspects of the supply chain up and down the state. Our industry is overtaxed, overregulated. There's still a rampant illicit market that is occurring. There is cannabis coming in from other parts of the state. There's still trespass grows around, indoor that's completely unregulated. And at the same time, there's not enough licensed retailers for people around the state to actually buy legal weed that has been tested and taxed.
Can California realize that, and can it change the big engine that is California government to meet the needs fast enough?
Because Proposition 64 was a voter initiative, it makes it much more challenging to change than something that is created through a legislative process. I fundamentally do not, because I've worked in public policy for a dozen years now, I really do not like voter initiatives. They are challenging in theory, they are a democratic process, but in order to pass a ballot initiative in California, the 5th largest economy in the world with 40 million people, it costs tens and tens of millions of dollars. And so unless one is part of a conglomerate with a lot of money, it can be very challenging to pass an initiative.
You know, I've always hated the proposition process. I taught civics for 30 years. I hated the proposition. What are lawmakers for?
That's what lawmakers are for.
Exactly.
In transparent public process that we can then affect. And I mean, that is fundamentally one of the biggest issues is Proposition 64. The people who wrote it behind closed doors cut and pasted legislation, draft legislation, and then they baked it in permanently into this ballot initiative. And most people didn't read it.
No, nobody's going to read.
Nobody read it. Nobody read
it. Of initiatives. What is troubling to me in what you just said is it seems as if, okay, you're legalizing something for the first time. You don't know how it's going to go. You are going to have regulatory provisions within the initiative. You should be able to see how things are working out and go ahead and deal with this or that. Yeah, ratchet it, fine tune it. And that seems to be the problem that you're facing right now.
Very much so. I mean, and so as you noted, the issue that we worked on locally was Measure S, which is the County Cultivation Tax. And that County Cultivation Tax was imagined in late 2015, almost 7 years ago, which in cannabis years is like, dog years, right?
Well, why did you use the word imagined?
Because that's when it was being brainstormed.
Okay.
As part, and I'll just call it like this. It's a spoonful of sugar to help the medicine go down. And it was an opportunity for the county to become the recipient of tax monies that had previously not gathered so directly from the cannabis industry.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was an incentive for the county to develop a regulatory structure so that it could regulate and tax cultivation, which, we know Humboldt for a reason. There's been a lot of cultivation here for the last 50 years, but it has always operated in the either illicit or gray markets. And so it's evasive. And, it comes with both benefits and extreme costs. And so the county was able to tax it. And, this tax was imagined. It seemed like Occam's razor, very easy, $1, $2, $3 a square foot, and that everything would be fine. But where we were 7 years ago, 6, 7 years ago, is the prices for cannabis were propped up by prohibition.
Mm-hmm.
And prohibition, the end of prohibition has allowed the massive infiltration of new operators into California's market. And that is fundamentally one of the biggest issues. Is the state of California has allowed the substantial overproduction of cannabis in California, well beyond what its own legal market can consume. And it's estimated that there is probably between 3 and 5 times more marijuana being grown in the state than the legal market can consume. And yet the state of California is collecting all of those licensing fees, and they're collecting their state taxes. Meanwhile, the price to all of these operators across the board have plummeted. They're absolutely sunk. And in some situations, the rate to the farmer, they have to pay more to the state than they make themselves.
So is there a way to put a ceiling, a cap on the number of licenses that go out?
There was supposed to be, as part of Proposition 64, there was not supposed to be any cultivation greater than 1 acre. But at the 11th hour in December of 2017, that acreage cap was surreptitiously removed through political finagling. And
that creates the quantity that takes the supply and demand curve and changes changes everything.
And that's why in the news people see there's like these 80-acre farms in Santa Barbara, Lake County, Salinas, massive indoor facilities. And we're overproducing.
I see. Tell us about the changes you were able to get on the local Measure S tax relief when you organized your campaign. And then also, if you could tell us, did that help increase the political IQ of your members to go through that organizing effort?
I certainly hope so. You said that you're a civics professor. My background's environmental science with an emphasis on public policy. I came and was trained and taught as an environmental watchdog. And some of the most fun I have is working with our membership, what's on the Planning Commission agenda, what's on the Board of Supervisors agenda. You now have a voice, how to educate yourself, how to give public comment. And I mean, that to me is wonderful and exciting. As far as what happened with Measure S, we started working with the supervisors as far back as late August last year, as the market started to plummet. And so as soon as the market started to dip, we started raising the red flag last year in the summer. And what the collective industry, we weren't sure, was this a glitch or an anomaly? Were things gonna bounce back? And so we were working with the supervisors back in October. They said, okay, you don't have to pay this tax bill that would be due in October. You won't have late penalties if you pay it by the end of May. We're like, okay, that'll give us a little bit of time. But then as we came through the winter, the dead of winter, and prices, when they should be rising, typically were actually going down even further. And what had happened is the county inadvertently created a balloon payment situation, because the farmers would have 2 tax bills due back to back, one in March and one in May.
Right.
And they simply do not have the cash on hand to be able to pay that tax bill up front, because they have no access to capital. These are our farmers in Humboldt are 97, 98% of them are self-funded. These are not venture capital or bank-backed operations or businesses. So they can't get loans. They can't even get home equity lines of credit because they're cannabis businesses. So if they don't have funding, they need to keep a little bit on hand to start the growing season, to pay their workers to get the plant through to harvest. And then a lot of people that are watching this, it's like selling cannabis is not easy. Like and they are not paid immediately. So it can take months. So even if, they harvest in July or October and they sell out through distribution, it's sold on consignment. And so they might not have cash in hand for 3, 4, 5, 6 months from the date of harvest, which makes things all the more challenging.
Well, we're going to have to wrap it up. I'm going to ask a quick question and then go ahead and say goodbye. We should have you back. I mean, it's a fascinating experience to listen to all this. It sounds exhausting.
It
Do you
is.
have fun at it?
I do because I really love working with our farmers and our members. They are what inspire me to do the work. We've personally met and engaged with all of our members, like hearing their hopes and dreams and aspirations, their fears, and really just understanding that they are trying their best to do the right thing. And they really just want an honest shot to be, regular, normalized tax-paying businesses. And so while I still have energy, I will wake up with the sunrise and hop on my 2 phones and laptops, and my colleagues are doing the same thing. And with a lot of volunteers, it really makes, heavy lifting makes it, what's the phrase? Many hands make the work light. And so by working in coalition, we're able to do it.
Well, I think organizers are saints. So, keep up the good work. I want to thank Natalynne DeLapp for coming on the show. She is the director of the Humboldt Growers Alliance. They have a great website that talks about all kinds of other things they do that we didn't get to this time, so you could see it. That's about all the time we have for today. And I want to thank you for joining us here on Community Voices. Thank you.
Thank you.
This has been Community Voices with your host, Paul Bressoud. If you represent a nonprofit organization and are interested in being a guest on Community Voices, send an email to info@accesshumboldt.net or call 476-1798. Access Humboldt, local voices through community media.